Well, hello everyone. Let me just take a second to make sure that everything's up and going. I guess that's not working. Cool. I hope everyone can see my screen now. Apparently this doesn't want to work. Let's see if I can get that working. That's not working. Oh, that's the wrong one. That's why. There we go. That's what I want. Okay, cool. So that should be on my... Wow, there's quite a bit of delay, it seems, between when I do something and when it shows up on the live stream. Hopefully you can hear what I'm saying. Now we can watch it happen again. Oh, cool. Well, welcome everyone. I don't think we have too many people here right now. It says 4 watching now. I'm 1. Brett Rose. TBJBU2. I'm not sure who you are, but welcome. And we might have another person on. So my name is Joe Skeen. I have been doing software development since I was probably, I don't know, around 8 years old. My first experience with doing software development was something like this. And I'm so glad that we've moved beyond that. Let me tell you a little bit about my background and why I'm even doing web development to begin with, because it's really quite relevant to why we're doing this screencast today. See, back in the day, I taught myself HTML back in the Notepad days. Eventually, although I really loved how, you could just make a change, save the file, flip over to the browser and reload, and everything would be hunky-dory. Eventually, I discovered there was Notepad++, which just brought everything to a new level. Syntax highlighting, commenting out code, and all that stuff. And I thought that was great. And for a while, it was all that I needed and more. But and I'd also done some PHP, doing some what do you call it? Kind of independent contractor work on the side. And there we go. Sweet. Now I can actually see what you guys are doing here. Yeah, so I did a lot of stuff like that, and with PHP, taught myself that, and eventually I got to the point where I decided that the World Wide Web was not a space I wanted to play in. I had learned a lot about C# and Java and other strongly typed languages, and whenever I'd look back on my code that I did for web, it was just a big, huge mess. And I thought, I don't need to have any of this. I'd much rather stick with the better tooling experiences and things that we get in the strongly typed languages. So I made a departure from the web world, and when I came back, it was about 2 years ago, I found that everything was different. Everything had changed. And that's what I'm going to be talking about is there's a new World Wide Web as far as web development is concerned. JavaScript has evolved, and the tooling that is available for web developers today is, miles and miles ahead of what we had available to us, a couple decades ago. So, what am I going to be talking about in this webcast? Now, the first caveat is this is my first time doing a webcast ever, so I apologize for the lack of visual aids and things like that. Those will get better as the series continues, as well as my webcasting skills. I'd also like to incorporate more audio so people can talk and participate that way. But as far as what I'm actually going to cover here, I don't claim to know everything about web development. What I know about web development is a very small subset of the entirety of web development. That world has changed so much, and there's so much depth and breadth that I can only share my small corner of that knowledge. But what I can share is some fundamentals about being a web developer in this modern or postmodern age that will help you to be able to get started and be able to explore these different technologies yourself. So let's get started. This is meant to be kind of a code along thing, so I hope that you'll be listening along and kind of follow along with the different things I'm going to do. So the first thing I want you to do is, if you've never downloaded Node.js, let's just go to that website really quick, because this is going to become a really important thing as we're going along. Node.js allows for JavaScript to be executed in a non-browser environment. So a desktop environment, a server environment, and Node really powers all of the different tools that we're going to be using for web development in this series. So go ahead and go down to nodejs.org and get the latest. You could do 6.10 or 7.7.3. Either one will work for what we're doing here. And just go ahead and download. Let's see what version I actually have right now. Node-v. I'm running on 7.5.0. So I might as well, upgrade to the latest 7. And while that's doing that, I want to tell you a little bit about some of the cool things you can do with Node.js. You did see just a minute ago that I was able to pop up a console window, and let's see here. Did I close it? I guess I closed it. With Node, you can do a lot of JavaScript practice right from your command line. You type Node and you can do any kind of JavaScript expression like hello world. Can't type when people are watching. To lowercase. So it's kind of cool. You got that environment there where you can just kind of play around with JavaScript and see what it does. It's very similar to kind of the like the Chrome developer tools or other browser developer tools where you can just go in the console and start doing things. But with the Node, you have access to a lot more things like running child processes in the background, or getting operating system information. Because it's not running in the browser sandbox, you can do stuff like os.platform, and it says I'm running Win32. Great thing about Node.js is it's free, open source, and it'll work on any platform. I've used Node on Windows, on Mac, on Linux, and it's a very powerful, oh, I probably need to close that. It's a very powerful platform. We'll get into more of the actual meat of Node later on, but you'll need it along the way. Another thing I want to talk about while we're getting started is, if you haven't ever been to GitHub, let's go over there right now. Oh, I'm sorry if I'm echoing. Let's see if I can... is that better? Let me know if I'm still echoing. I'm still trying to figure out the controls of this stuff. You're probably still a bit behind on here. Am I still echoing? Yes? Or is that better? Yes. I don't know. Not sure what you're talking. Okay, good. All right. So anyway, GitHub is kind of the backbone of open source today. GitHub provides free open source code hosting. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what to do about the chat delay. But anyway, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing is going to be using GitHub. So if you've never gone to GitHub, go ahead and create an account. It's free, and it will be needed to do a lot of the stuff that we're going to do throughout this process. Open source development has really changed over the last couple of decades. I remember when we would talk about open source, even 10 years ago, it was usually like SourceForge or oh gosh, I can't even remember some of the old systems. It was usually some kind of SVN backed thing with kind of cryptic rules and not really a good, easy way to participate. And I mean, you could download the source code, but there wasn't really an interactive experience. All that really changed with the popularity of Git. Git is a source control system that is, they call it a distributed source control system. So instead of having one central server that's the official true version of the code, you can have as many different remote repositories as you want for forking, for branching, and you can manage all that really easily in Git compared to Subversion or other earlier source control systems. So as we're going through these things, I'd like you to, chime in if you're having any trouble understanding what it is I'm saying, or if you can't keep up. I definitely want to stay on top of this. If you're running on Windows, one of the things you'll definitely want to do is download Git for Windows. And here we are. You can download that here because we're going to need Git definitely throughout the process. If you're on a Mac, I believe it comes pre-installed. I can't remember when I was on my Mac at Intermountain whether it had Git already installed on it or not. But it should be easy for anyone to get. Git is an open source, I think it's open source, yeah, source control system. Alright, let's see here. Yeah, it looks like they're still doing that. Okay, so far, how are you guys doing? Am I going at a good pace? Are you getting kind of what I'm asking you to code along and do with me? Do you have any questions about what we've covered so far? I know we haven't really gotten into anything, but we're going to need these tools set up on your machine for you to be able to follow along as we go through the examples we'll be going through. Okay, so back with the question you had earlier, TBJBU2. What kind of languages are we going to learn? That's a really great question. My experience recently with web development has been primarily with JavaScript, ECMAScript 6, TypeScript, Angular, jQuery, Knockout. I haven't really gotten into React, although I'm intrigued by React and I'd like to learn. Just haven't had the time to really dive into it. But we're going to focus on kind of Node and Angular and TypeScript as kind of a foundational basis for web development, and from there you can learn other things. Daddy. Alright, if you'll excuse me just a second, we're going to take a 2-minute break and then we'll start talking about some other things and dive into some more awesome web stuff. Alright, we're back. Let's see. Looks like we don't have any more comments so far. So I assume that means that people are able to follow along okay. So by this point you should have installed Node.js and Git on your system. Before we jump into all the web development stuff, let me just show you how Git works and allow you to give this a try because we're going to need it later on in the series. Let's go over to my profile here in GitHub. So if you go to github.com/joeskeen, that is my GitHub page. And let's just grab one of these. I haven't worked on this one for a while, but this will at least allow you to test that you've got everything working. So github.com/joeskeen/ng examples. I'll go ahead and paste that in the chat so that you guys have that there. I haven't hooked it up on Restream to get that out to Beam and Twitch, so I apologize if anyone's out on that. So in GitHub, you have this button that says clone or download. And you can just go ahead and select that URL there. And open up a command prompt. Once you've installed Git for Windows, this should work. And go to code slash, or wherever you want to. I usually just put my code off of the root. Windows does have that peculiar max path thing, so I try to put my code as close to the root of the drive as possible. So you can make whatever folders you want to put things there. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Git to pull down this repository here, the ng examples. Now, in Git, you don't actually have to create a folder for the repository that you're going to pull down. The git clone command will do that for you, and you just git clone and then the URL. Hit enter there, and it will create that. If you do a directory search here, you'll see now that I have an ng examples folder. And all of the files that are on the root of this here now appear on the root of that. That's how we pull down files in Git. Now, there are other tools that you can use in order to help with pulling down files. There's one called Source Tree, which I think is probably one of the most widely used tools for Git. It's kind of a graphical user interface for Git that you can have a nice little pretty button to commit or pull or push changes. As I said earlier with regards to Git, when you're cloning a repository, unlike with, say, for instance, Subversion, where you're just pulling down a working copy at a revision, Git actually clones the entire repository, all of its history, all of the commit information. Basically, you have a fully fledged master repository that you now have on your disk. And that can make it really easy if you want to fork that repository and do other things, or in disaster recovery settings, you just have to push that repository to a different remote and it will be absolutely back up to where you want it to be. Also, transferring between different hosts and things like that is really easy with Git because you have the full history there. You don't have to query the server every time you want to search the history like you do in centralized repositories, source control repositories. Um, so that's one reason I really like Git is it's just very, very lightweight and yet very fully featured, and you have complete control over everything. Okay, so I hope everyone's been able to go ahead and clone that down. Um, so as I was saying with Git, since it's a fully fledged repository, when you make a commit, it doesn't automatically push it to the remote server. In fact, you can go in and say git remote, and it will tell you, or git remote -v, it'll tell you what the remote servers are, but when you commit, it commits to your local repository since it's a fully fledged Git repository. You can actually have multiple remote repositories you push to, and we'll see some of that later on in the series as we talk more about open source workflows and how to contribute to some of these repositories that we'll be talking about. But just keep that in mind. It commits to your local, and once you have made a commit, you'll have to push that to whatever remote repository. In this case, we'll probably just be using the one that is by default named origin. That means that's where you cloned the code from originally. And so that's by default the place you would push your commits to. How are we doing? Brett, did you want to get on the call so that we can have more of a conversation rather than a monologue?
Hello there, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Cool. So, how are things going so far?
Things are going well. I mean, since I'm a developer too, then this is pretty basic stuff, but
Sure. I know
I'm
that
hoping
one.
that other people can um, get something out of it.
Right, and I failed to mention that Brett is really the main reason why I'm here doing this today. Brett, you've been talking to me for a while about teaching you web development, and I'm really excited that we're finally getting to that point where we're getting started on this. Now, you mentioned that Git was one area that you wanted to cover a little bit. What are the things that you are wondering about Git or not understanding that you'd like to have covered today?
Well, it's not as bad as it was because in my new job I've been using it quite a bit. But I guess the hardest part to understand with Git for me is um, really just the different commands that you need to use and understanding what are the right commands. Uh, trying to figure out like what changes you have and how to only add specific changes or how to add all the changes. You
Ah,
know, normally I use a UI for it, and doing it from the command line is a little more difficult if you don't know all the commands. So,
yeah, and that's true. And I would say for anyone who's new to Git, it's probably most convenient to use a tool that can help you automatically with that. And the next tool that we're actually going to cover um, or have you install is Visual Studio Code, which actually has some pretty good Git integration in it. Um, so if you want to head over to code.visualstudio.com, now this is not the same, Visual Studio Code is not the same as Visual Studio. Visual Studio is a full-featured IDE. Visual Studio Code is a lightweight code editor that has been created by Microsoft for the purpose of doing web development. It's completely free and works on any platform Mac, Linux. It's just actually written with web technologies. It's an Electron app, which is basically a desktop app that uses kind of a browser-like interface. Uh-oh, my internet's not handling the call. That's not good. Um, well, sheesh. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about that. Let me see if we can. Oh, call has ended. Okay. All right, Brett. Thanks for joining us for those few minutes. Hope you'll join us in the chat. Okay, anyway, go to code.visualstudio.com. Go ahead and download for whatever platform you're using, because we're going to be using this quite a bit. I already have it installed on my machine. And let me give you just a quick tour of some of these things here. Right now I'm kind of working on my, yeah, right now I'm working on a homepage for my GitHub. And you can see here that it already has Git integrated in here. And it will show me all of the different changes that I have. The things that I've changed here, you click on it and it'll open up a diff view where you can see all the different things. Now, it's kind of nice because when you're when you're going through these changes and getting ready to check in, you can say, you know what, I just want to do this file as a commit here. When you add it, it goes under staged changes. And what's really happening there is, so you've got one file that is staged and ready to be committed. So you can do a commit and it will only check in the staged files. Now that can be nice if you're kind of being selective. A lot of Git UIs will just kind of automatically stage everything if you haven't done so when you do the commit. But it's nice that you can kind of be selective there. I don't think I have source tree installed on this machine yet. I just have recently gotten this, so I haven't set up everything yet. But another popular one is Atlassian source tree. It gives you kind of a graphical layout for it shows you the branch history and things like that to kind of help visualize some of the history. Visual Studio Code's integration is quite limited. It basically helps you to commit. But if you want to explore some of the more advanced features of Git, I'd recommend giving source tree a try until you understand how Git works, and then maybe you can kind of get more into the commands. The commands can be quite a learning curve if you haven't really done command line source control before. If you're used to source control like SVN from the command line, a lot of the commands are fairly similar, so you might not be too bad there. All right, Brett, let me know, or anyone else on the call, what other things would you like to know about Git before we move on to another topic? Uh-oh. Oh, I think there we go. Sorry, I'm still trying to learn how all these tools work. How do you do a diff and deal with conflicts? Okay. Well, let me actually go ahead and hop over and get Atlassian source tree because I think this is a pretty good um, tool to deal with some of that stuff. Now, by default, when there's conflicts, what you'll end up with, I don't have a really good example offhand, but you'll see in your file when you pull in the changes, you'll see something like this. Or mine. Oops. There's. Oh, that's interesting. Anyway, that's not super accurate. But basically, the Git, when you have conflicts, it'll throw those things in there, and a lot of tools will allow you to, it'll kind of parse it out. You can do a comparison. My favorite tool for diffing is Beyond Compare. It's not a free tool, but it's definitely worth the small amount of money that it costs. Um, that can help a lot if you're doing a lot of things with merge conflicts. I find that most of the time, though, in Git, you don't end up with merge conflicts as frequently as you would have with Subversion, because Git is a lot more branching and merging is a lot more a integral part of Git, and it's designed to be something you do every day. So I've found that although I do occasionally have merge conflicts, it's much more rare than with other source control systems I've used. Um, so maybe we can go a little bit more in depth with that in the future. In the meantime, you can, you know, let's see. I guess I can download this. I can kind of walk you through some of the ways you can just see diffs. I'd say, again, if you're new to Git, definitely get some kind of user interface that shows you how things are working and working together. Oh man, I don't know if I can even remember this. Oh, maybe I used that. I hope I used that. So it's a free tool, but they want you to log in. It's not really my favorite feature of that, but once you're logged in, you're fine and it doesn't bother you again. And it looks like I'll have to do that later. Maybe I'll have to come back to that next week and show you a little bit more about that. If you're just going to go at it from the command line, you can just type git diff and it will show you kind of the difference between the different files you have. This is using a Unix like interface here for I think it's Vim or VI or something like that. And you can see kind of the differences for each of the different commits or each of the different files that you have. The same kind of thing works. You can diff past change sets and things like that. Right now it's just doing a diff of my working directory. And you can push Q to quit out of that. I don't know if that does it the same way in PowerShell as in the other. Yeah, it works the same in command prompt. So this is kind of what you can expect. I imagine this is probably something they made better with Git for Windows as opposed to the earlier versions that they had. It's not too bad. Um, and it can be used if you're just quickly needing to check something and don't want to pull up a different app. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit about conflict resolution later when we actually get some conflicts, interesting conflicts to work with. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about right away, Brett, dealing with conflicts? Or Git? Let's see, what time are we at? 8:42. So I want to keep these as close to 1 hour as possible. That's so that I'm not wasting your time, I'm not wasting my time, and it makes the videos a little bit easier to chunk up later if we wanted to do that on YouTube. These videos will be made available. Um, these videos will be available after the fact on YouTube. And I'm also planning on starting up a blog, a companion blog to this that will allow me to kind of go in after the fact, um, do some fact checking if I made any mistakes, publish examples, and um, doing other things, or kind of a just kind of a recap of what we covered and maybe a preview for the next week. Um, okay, cool. You love using Visual Studio to deal with merge conflicts. Yeah, if you have Visual Studio Community is actually they've gotten a lot further down the road as far as what their capabilities are with Git compared to what they were before, and Visual Studio Community is also a good thing. The one thing I don't like about Visual Studio is it'll take you a couple of hours to install it, it seems, depending on your internet connection, and it's just a very, very heavy duty beast. Um, Not to say it doesn't have its place. I use it every day at work, but um, I, when you're talking about just straight up modern web development, I think you're really going to enjoy what Visual Studio Code brings to the table, as we'll see throughout this series. But yeah, again, Visual Studio has some great tooling in there as well. If you want to go that route, that's great. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit um, about the technologies we'll be touching here. So we've already installed Node. I hope everyone's got that installed. So let's just go ahead and you should have Visual Studio Code open by now. Let's just create a new project here. Let's go open folder, and I'll just create a new folder. I'll just sandbox, and I'll just call this my app. Oops, my app. So when we open this in Visual Studio Code, we have literally nothing here, but we can add new files, folders, and one of the great things that I like to do with code is if you push the Control tick button that's right under the escape key, you can pull up a embedded terminal. By default in Windows, it defaults to PowerShell. You can actually change that in the user settings if you prefer CMD. But the great thing here is it pulls it right up to the folder you're in, and you can do things like npm init. Now npm is the package manager for Node. When you installed Node, it installed npm. And this is the way that we're going to get all of the different packages in our web app. I'm just going to kind of go through all the defaults right now because it doesn't really matter too much to me. But you'll notice it dumped out a package.json file. And you'll be seeing changes to this as we go through this. So let's just go ahead and we're going to show you a little bit about how TypeScript works. So we're going to do npm install save dev TypeScript. So what we're doing here is we're going to install this package into our local app here. Save dev will mark it as a development dependency, which means at runtime we won't need it. It'll only be for when we're coding. And TypeScript is the name of the package. We'll cover a little bit more in depth about TypeScript next week, but I just wanted to show you a little bit about how to install this package, and we'll just create a TypeScript file right now. Index.ts. So TypeScript is basically just JavaScript with additional features that make tooling easier. So anything you can do in JavaScript, you can do it in TypeScript. Now, we haven't really covered anything with JavaScript yet, but I recommend that as we go through this, use TypeScript when possible because you'll get a lot better help with what are the different things you can do. Like with a string, it'll show you exactly all the things that you can do because it knows what type you're working with. X dot. See, it knows that X is a number, and so it's just going to help you with all that stuff. We'll talk a little bit more next week about TypeScript. I'll probably kind of do a recap of some of the previous presentations I've done on TypeScript, because this is going to be a really important thing for us to know about going in to some of the other things that we're going to talk about, especially Angular and some of the other technologies that we'll be working with throughout this series. So the tilde, just so you know, Brett, is the little squiggly mark that's above the tick symbol. So if I said control tilde, that would mean control shift tick, just like exclamation point would be shift 1. Winky face. Oh, there is a huge delay. And I'm hoping that as this series goes on that I'll get a little bit more experienced with streaming, and maybe we can clean up some of these and have little to no delay. It's okay. It's early in the morning. I'm not going to judge you too harshly, Brett. Alright, so just a recap of what we've covered today and what you should have done by now. If you haven't done, go ahead and do it before the next week because we'd like to be up and rolling. So Node.js, which is being able to run JavaScript outside the browser, and that's nodejs.org. Make sure you download that. Git, if you're on Windows, for Windows. Make sure that's installed. Make sure you have a version of Visual Studio Code, at code.visualstudio, oop, wow, .org. Let's see, what else did we install today? Source tree is optional but recommended. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. It's an Atlassian product. Have a GitHub account. And try cloning something from GitHub. And the example there is, let's see. This repository here. Let's see, what else did we talk about? Version 6.x or 7.x will be fine. I think that's mainly what we covered. Make sure, whoops. Make sure npm works by installing TypeScript globally using npm i-g TypeScript. That's saying we want to install that globally on our system so that we now have, when we type tsc-v, it's available on the command line. I think that's not actually the latest version of TypeScript, so I'm going to install that globally right now. npm i-g TypeScript. There we go. So now I'm on version 2.2.1, which is the current latest. So I'm hoping that you guys are finding this relevant. I know that we'll have a lot of different people that are with a lot of different levels of software engineering experience. But I hope that every week, that my main goal is that you can come away from these thinking, whoa, I learned something new today that I feel like I could actually use this week. So I know that this week was pretty introductory and kind of walking through some of the tools. I hope I didn't lose too many people there. But I hope as we go on that this will be a really useful thing, and that you'll continue the feedback back to me to let me know what I can do better or what you'd like to see more as we go through this series. Let's see here. Do you prefer GitHub over Bitbucket? That's a really great question. So GitHub is completely free for open source projects. So for anything I do open source, I do it on GitHub. And most of the time, a lot of the things I do, I don't care if people look at the code, because I'm doing a lot of stuff as presenter and kind of in the open source community. If there's ever a time when I want to do something that I don't want to open source, I do it on Bitbucket, because Bitbucket has free private repositories. So it really just depends on what you're doing. We'll for sure be interacting a lot more with GitHub through the course of our web development journey here, because a lot of the stuff, almost all of the stuff we'll be working with is hosted on GitHub. But if you want to kind of do your own private stuff, Bitbucket is great, and I still love Bitbucket. That was a really great question. Thanks for asking that, Brett. Are there any other questions? We're getting low on time here, and I don't have anything else that I could really cover other than answering questions in the time we have. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions come through. Oh, we've got 8 watching now. Wow. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, all of these videos will be available afterwards on my YouTube profile. So I think most of you are watching on YouTube right now. You can just go to my channel, which is DigitHead or Joe Skeen. If you just search for Joe Skeen, you'll find it pretty easily. Just remember it's a 30-second delay. I know, that's hard. Yep, but yeah, it'll all be available after the fact. I'm hoping that the future videos will be more polished than this one. As I said, it's my first time doing this, so I'm still working out some of the kinks and understanding how all this streaming stuff works. I've done a lot of presentations at conferences before live audiences, but I've never done a screencast before, so it's pretty cool. Alright, so we got a couple more minutes left. Hopefully, if you have any burning questions or things you didn't understand from today, you'd like me to go into more detail, I'd love to cover that. And if you have any questions after the fact, be sure you can send me an email. My email address is joeskeen@outlook.com. So you should be able to see that in the video, but I'm not going to post it where everyone else can see it, or where the bots can see it. But that's my email address. Go ahead and shoot me a message if you have any questions or requests of things you'd like to see in future episodes of this webcast series. Or a tweet. You know what? That's even better. I like that better. So scratch the email. I mean, unless you have a really private question you want to ask me. But twitter.com/Joe Skeen Jr. If you get not that picture or not something that looks like me, then you've got the wrong one. Joe Skeen is something different. But yeah, Joe Skeen Jr. on Twitter. Go ahead and tweet me. I've got my live stream information up there, and I'd be happy to answer tweets throughout the week. Good catch, Brett. Alright, well, I'll stay on for another couple of minutes to see if there's any final questions, but this is 9 o'clock, so feel free to have a great Saturday, and hopefully you've learned something today, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Thanks, everyone.